has it. Yeah, he does. All right, cool. Joseph, do you have one as well? Just make sure everyone knows what we're talking about. All right.
Yes,
so let's
yes, I do. I'm sorry.
I just pulled it up.
All right, perfect. Yeah, let's see if I can. Yeah. All right. So I shared this just in case someone is hopping on and doesn't have it. So the first, I guess you all put me up front. So I had a couple, like we said, we asked people to give their best 3 so that we wouldn't be here all day. But the first was the state should negotiate with body cam hardware and software vendors for preferable rates and options for all police departments. The contracts must emphasize maintaining security and privacy of records, as explained by the Department of Homeland Security representative. All police departments must use one of the negotiated contract schedules in order to drive down the cost. How do folks feel about that?
To me, there's economies of scale. I mean, by doing something like that and going with using that one vendor process, to me, just makes sense on being able to drive the cost down.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I'm okay with that one.
I imagine the state can. Oh, good to see you, Rob. Do you have the recommendations in front of you too? Just in case. Well, you can see it on the screen. Yeah, I imagine the state could also negotiate, like options that can be added for a particular department on top, and they bear that extra expense, but generally it drives down the cost for everyone. All right, so here's how I think we'll probably be best to do it. Let's go through all 3 that someone recommends, and then we'll allow everyone to say which they like, they don't like. And Al, if you can keep a record of that, Al and Katie, and we'll go from there. So that's the first one. The second one I had was the state should establish an entity to handle body-worn camera redaction release services for police departments, state's attorney offices, public defenders, et cetera. A recommendation for 1 and 2 should allow for economies of scale and cost savings to each department. Civilian review boards should have access to unredacted data to investigate officers as needed. All officers in the field should have body-worn cameras. The third one I had was all departments must get their body-worn camera programs and policies certified periodically by the Maryland Police Standards and Training Commission's department. Deploying body-worn cameras must meet essential criteria for written policies and have policies in place to audit and evaluate the program, just ensure it's being used. Further, the commission should be empowered to enforce punishments on departments that are out of compliance. There's no point in having standards if people, don't follow them. Lastly, included within department policies must be a discipline matrix for not adhering to department body-worn camera policy. And that someone sent me that we added to that. So we can go around. What do folks think about the 3? What you're for, what you may not be for. It's fine to be candid.
I agree with everything that you had to say. And that's actually, as I read through the list, I realized that a lot of us submitted similar recommendations. So I think that's it's in line with, I think, both what we learned, but also with some of the other recommendations that are there. I'm fine with all that.
I agree.
This is Sheriff Mondor. I would have issues with number 2.
Okay.
First of all, I think it would be almost impossible to have a state department that would do redaction and release for all agencies. I don't know how that would be possible. The other issue I have with that is the public defender's office does not represent everyone, and so they should not have access to all of the body cameras. I think that would be, first of all, a violation of evidence and would create some issues for law enforcement and the courts. As far as number 3, I'm okay with the first part of that. I'm not sure what the commission would be able to do to enforce punishments on department that are out of compliance. that would be something maybe that Al could speak with.
Al, what do you think?
Well, currently, right now, the commission has no such authority. Now, certainly, I guess legislation could give them that authority. I'm not so sure, though, what sanctions would be appropriate. Because again, the commission deals with training standards and certification requirements and standards for police officers. So to take that jump, it would be a huge jump. And again, I'm not sure what the sanctions would be that could be imposed.
Could certification or revocation, is that amongst the list of options that you currently have available, or that would be effective in a scenario like this?
Yeah, it's an option for each individual officer, not for the department. It would be against the officer, him or herself, not per se the department.
So I guess this could be getting at then if there is I guess somehow pervasive issues of officers in a particular department, I guess not adhering to the body-worn camera standards and policies that the commission has put in place, then I think the idea is that there should be some pressure put on the department itself to make sure their officers are adhering to policy is the ultimate goal.
So, Lewis, I see what you're getting at, but I just don't think the Police Training Commission would be the best entity to do this.
Okay.
I mean, I understand what you're trying to accomplish with this, and just to circle back, I agree with the sheriff as far as his assessment of 2 and 3, but I see what you're trying to get at, and maybe as we go through the other recommendations, we can find a way to circle back to what you're trying to accomplish. But I just don't think the Police Training Commission, because you're not gonna single out individual officers. That's not the way it's done. The individual department would discipline the officers. Mm-hmm. So that I think it's an oranges to apples kind of comparison here. So I know what you're getting at, but I think we need to come up with a better way to, number one, set standards, but number two, set up some type of mechanism so if departments are not adhering to those standards, there are consequences. But the Police Training Commission, in my opinion, is not what
not be the best vehicle. Okay. No. All right.
If I could add some color to that one. So on your point number 3, so it sounds like there's 2 cuts of it. One is just auditing and evaluation, and hopefully we can agree to do something on that point. But on your second point about departments that maybe haven't implemented this or whatever, we had the same question over in the main the House policing work group. And where we landed on this type of issue was to condition the funding that comes in from the state for things like a body cam ramp up on the departments implementing the programs in compliance with the standards created by the Standards and Training Commission. So I thought that was a fairly simple way to say, like, if you're going to take the state money to do these things, you got to follow the state rules on this. It doesn't get at what happens when the individual officer is out of compliance with the rules, but assuming the department set the rules up correctly, it would avoid that situation. So I don't know if that gets at what you were trying to get at, but it would at least have a very small nudge to say, like, hey, you can't take that public money if you're not going to do the program the way that you're supposed to. And on the first one, one thing I would just flag is my recommendations, which come right after Delegate Lewis's, are on similar topics, but not quite the same points. But for example, I agree with getting the statewide contract to drive down rates. But sort of my spin and question on this, and I guess it's worth throwing here before we vote on yours, is what does that mean with multiple vendors? Can this be, because if it's just Axon, then sure, you know, and if everyone's using Axon, I get the value there very clearly. But if we also then are forcing people to use the master contract, does that then mean there's also a pressure for all the jurisdictions to use the one vendor? I just throw it out there as a possibility. Is there a way for us to do this without prejudicing, you know, without basically forcing all the departments to go with the one vendor because that's what we negotiated. So I just offer that as a question on your number one. And then on number two, I had a feeling this was going to get tricky too. I was trying to get at the same thing you were getting at here. And again, I think we approached this sideways. But I guess what I'm getting at, and I think what you're getting at, is not necessarily that the public defenders and state's attorneys and whoever have direct access to raw footage and can instruct the officer, the release officers or PIA officers to give it to them, but that these cost savings, since we, the taxpayers, have to finance all of these various people who eventually tap this footage, the public defenders, the state's attorneys, the police themselves, that everyone should sort of have a share of the reductions, right? In eventually getting the correct chain of custody footage that they are entitled to, that they should get it at a savings materializing there. And at least, I don't know if that's, again, what you were getting at.
I mean, what I was trying to get at, well, first, for number one, I assumed it'd be like a contract schedule where it wouldn't just be one vendor. It might be, you know, we had 3 vendors present to us. I imagine all 3 vendors would apply to be part of this negotiated contract. It actually, in my mind, might be able to level the odds where Axon kind of, you know, hit the ground first with a lot of our departments. And since there's been a lot more companies that's come on board, if you have a contract schedule where they're all can be compared apples to apples at the same time, but the cost is lower, it gives some agency to the departments where they would have to go to one of the approved vendors on the contract schedule, but wouldn't necessarily be one single vendor, right? It'd be different than each department negotiating by themselves with multiple vendors, because you still get the economies of scale by having the state negotiate on behalf of all the departments. That was my idea with that one.
We already almost have that. I mean, we're able to ride other jurisdictions' contracts, so we already kind of have that in place. You know, so if, you know, the Montgomery County Police have a contract with Axon, we were able to ride that contract with Axon. So we already have some of that in place. So I suggest we kind of look back and we're not duplicating efforts with something. And as far as the possibility of only having one sole provider, that can't happen, because there's so many agencies with different platforms, whether it be Panasonic, where they're storing their own data, whether it be Axon, where they're storing the data in the cloud system. So I think that I understand what we're trying to get at is to lower the cost for individual agencies, but I think that may, or some semblance of that may already be in existence.
Well, I actually wonder. Oh, go ahead, Sheriff.
I was going to say, I agree with Chief Duvall in some of that. One of the things we're probably going to do if we try to do that is we're going to get ourselves into trouble with all the vendors that are out there. They're all going to want to participate, but then they're also going to want business. And then when they don't, you know, that's going to cause an issue. Plus, things are going to change. You know, you have to replace the cameras over a period of time. Is another vendor better at that point? Has something changed? And so it would be an ongoing process if you had to do that. I don't know what kind of hardship that would place on the state to continuously do those contracts. Just throw that out for.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, I was thinking that, and we don't have to stay on minds too long, because I know there's many iterative ideas here, but I was thinking similar to how you all have it in Montgomery County as an example, where I guess the municipalities and maybe the college and other folks can latch on to the countywide. Like we can imagine if you were to take that from just, the departments within Montgomery County to the entire state and how it would drive things hopefully further down. Maybe the marginal cost doesn't go much further down, but maybe it does, right? Each bit helps. To number two, so of course you all remember when we had State's Attorney Gibson speak before us, as well as we had the Office of Public Defender speak before us, and how they have costs associated with body-worn cameras as well. And were pleading with us that when we talk about costs, as much as it is cost for hardware and software and storage, and redaction, it's also cost to them. And so that we're not coming back to do this exact same thing again for them. My main thing was like, we should include some recommendation that takes into account that other than our police departments, other people are bearing costs for these programs. And if helping to drive costs down for them also helps make the entire program cheaper, then I think that will be a big boon for the taxpayer. But then lastly, it seems that folks are having civilian review boards and that type of thing, we should ensure that there's access. But
just one comment on that, because theirs would be personnel costs and it would be ongoing costs. If you set up a grant program for them, is that something that the state's going to sustain year after year, or is it just going to be a startup cost and then they have to incorporate that into their own budgets at some point and so forth? Just to throw that out.
Yeah, it may not be possible, but that was the idea of having a state agency that could handle the redaction and all that cost for folks, so that we wouldn't have to worry about ongoing things for every state's attorney office. That might not be practical, but for a whole host of reasons. But that's where but I don't want us to get stuck because we're almost like 15 minutes on mine, and I know we have all of yours to get through. If we can, I want to see if we can get through as many of these as possible, and then the overarching ideas we can then start to break up, because maybe some of you all have approached some of these from just a slightly different angle that may be more appropriate. And I want to make sure, we got another 30 minutes and we've only gone through one person's recommendations. Sorry, I'm gonna go through moons and then just keep a note of where you are on each of these. So delegate moons, number one, recommend negotiation of statewide contracts with multiple vendors, provide Maryland Department options, competitive prices. We kind of covered that. Two, recommend that public defenders be included in whatever savings are gained or negotiated through these collaborative efforts. Okay. Three, recommend adequate funding of PIA officers to allow for body cam PIA policy that errs on the side of public disclosure and that uses redaction instead of denial to address privacy and public safety concerns. Study the possibility of shared PIA officers to reduce the cost of transparency. Moon, do you want to elaborate?
Sure. I'm just trying to approach this soft here, but I know, because I was reading the recommendations from I think Howard County Department, and they were talking about the PIA privacy, victim privacy and things like this. So we have not really legislatively resolved this issue, but I keep coming back to this issue of the funding of the PIA officers and making sure we're good there, so that at least that's not the reason why PIA denials are being made or not made, that there's ample staff to handle it. People aren't feeling jammed up with work and requests. I at least wanted to open the door to the discussion about whether we could down the road share costs on some of the PIA officers, under the theory that if we are heading towards a world where everybody's on video storage platforms that use common tagging and across departments that actually, why wouldn't Maryland eventually be able to share a PIA officer if everybody's moving to evidence.com? It would stand to reason that it might be more possible, except for the issue of local control over, things like that and variations in bargaining. But that's sort of where I was coming from it. And on the second one, really, it's public defenders and any taxpayer financed entity that regularly is touching body cam footage. But basically, I don't like the idea of taxpayers reinventing the wheel on costs.
If I could just make one comment on 3. I can speak for my own department. We wouldn't deny a PIA request based on staffing. It may take longer to give the request to the requesting party, but we wouldn't deny it. It just may take longer to get it to the party. And I'm not sure about the shared PIA officer. I'm assuming we're still going to have different platforms. I cannot see that everyone in the state is going to go to the cloud-based system. And speaking for my former agency, I think there's no way they're going to go away. They have a long-term financial investment in that Panasonic platform where they store their own data. It would be, it would be very costly for them to transition from that. So I think we're going to have a lot of departments with different platforms, so that would be hard. I see what you're trying to get at, but I just think it'd be really hard to do.
I mean, for me, I think our PIA requests are handled through our legal, and with consultation with the police department. Right now, under the PIA laws, there's some, I would say, temporary permissible denials. If it's an open investigation, we're not going to release it until a final declaration, and that's even consulting the state's attorney's office that it's okay to release. I think it's releasing, depending on the incident. I think there's always going to be some sort of collaboration between the state's attorney's office, our legal, and public interest. So I don't know. It's a very fluid discussion, I guess, but ultimately the redaction of it is very time consuming. And there's always constant reviews of it. You'll run it through redaction one time. Somebody has to look at it to make sure you got everything. If not, you got to go back through it again. So I don't know if that is, where is that properly housed? Because should it be the police department that's where that video is coming from? Because they would know, what is private and what is not.
I guess, sorry, just to elaborate, this is sort of what I'm getting at, because that's the same, what you just described to me is the same concern I hear every time I get into a discussion about body cam redaction and PIA and privacy concerns. Either like an officer was killed or you're inside someone's house and it's a sex assault victim. And I keep hearing this concern about how time consuming it is to redact this footage. So I guess that's where, and frankly, legislatively, because of that, the push from some departments was, therefore, you need to make this more of a denial situation than having it be a case where the public can ask for a redacted version. So that's sort of the dynamic I'm trying to address here. It's like, okay, but if that's the concern, what if across departments you're having the same people doing that process? Surely there's a savings to be had there if Howard, Montgomery, and Frederick all have the same people cutting out footage. I don't know. That's just, it's not my area, but that's where I was trying to get with it.
Okay.
The other concern you have with release prematurely is you certainly don't want to taint any kind of a jury in a criminal case and so forth too. So that's why the state's attorney is always consulted prior to release on those types of things.
So I'm
Correct me if I'm wrong though, but Delegate Moon, you were just talking about the possibility of creating some sort of a task force to look at this idea though, right? We're not talking about legislation right now.
Well, right. I mean, number 3 is sort of cheating. There's 2 parts there. One is make sure everyone's staffed well on PIA, but the other is really this idea about whether we shouldn't look at law enforcement agencies sharing redaction staff in some way. Studying the idea. If you don't want to study the idea, that's fine. I just had heard that concern expressed enough times that I thought, why don't we encourage people to look at if there's a way for us to pool costs on that.
So we're going to hop over to Councilman Solomon. He just let me know that he's at an airport right now so that he can respond to any concerns quickly, and we'll go back up to Senator Reedy, just because I know he's going to hop on the airport.
Thank you. My first recommendation was around reporting. What I noticed on the committee is a lot of the information that we were trying to make assessments based upon was information that we didn't necessarily have from the state of Maryland. So I felt that whatever we wrote up with regard to body-worn camera programs, we should probably have a requirement that departments begin to report metrics on their body-worn camera programs. And these metrics could help to indicate the state on changes or modifications to the overall program that we come up with on a year-to-year basis. My second recommendation was on was for the state of Maryland to actually invest in the body-worn camera infrastructure. So this is the actual storage site and infrastructure for video uploads, because I think that's where, in listening to the various departments that presented, that's where the major cost is. And if the state was to, build that infrastructure itself with private partners, and they could release whatever contract they wanted and in the ways described by other recommendations. But the state will be the primary entity that's responsible. And then each department can still use whichever vendors or agency they wanted, Panasonic or whatever, their preferred vendor was on the actual body cameras themselves, as long as those cameras were tied into, were feeding back into the infrastructure that the state had built with this department. And I think that's probably the solution that works best to allow as much flexibility on the for the police departments in terms of shopping around for which cameras they wanted to purchase, in terms of focusing on the part of the body-worn camera that most impacts them, selecting the cameras, selecting which types of hardware best goes into the car. And it allows the state to take on the part that most agencies are not as familiar with, which is how do we move that data, how do we store that data, how do we manage access to that data. And I think that's the appropriate place to do that segregation. Finally, is on enforcement. I agree with the previous sentiment shared. It makes less sense to do the robust job of having an enforcement program, a body-worn camera program, and then not have the participants follow the regulations that have been passed. So I think that there should be some evaluation of how do we ensure that individual officers as well as departments are following along with the program as described by this commission.
Councilman, on the infrastructure, were you also, I remember we spoke about this for infrastructure, were you also talking about some consistency in tagging across the state? Because I remember we were saying that when people are trying to go back in and look, what people use to tag may be different. I don't know if that was implied in there.
Yes, that is included there. So consistency with how information is tagged, consistency with access, consistency with following the storage requirements that were mentioned by the Department of Homeland Security during their presentation. I think that leaving all of those things up to individual agencies, you end up with just about as many solutions and recommendations as you have jurisdictions involved in policing. But I think if we centralize those pieces, we get, the state gets one version to manage, and like I said, the agencies can focus on the parts of body-worn camera programs that they're best suited for.
Any questions for the councilman before you stop on playing?
Can I ask a question about? I had the talk about requiring all through this process. We've talked about how we don't want to mandate something if there's not the ability to pay for it. I like incentivizing rather than mandating. I mean, I don't know how everybody else feels on this, but some small departments, do they need a body-worn camera? I think we'd like everybody to do them, but I don't know about adding. My only question with some of these recommendations is like, how much are we mandating versus how much are we incentivizing?
If I could answer, I use the term requirement here because I do think long-term our goal should be this is a requirement for every agency that's going to be involved in policing. I do get that, as we start this program off, and part of the reason why including reporting there is because we want to learn as we get better. So I don't know that we can start off with a hard mandate. I think that you're right that incentivizing is going to be the best avenue to start. But I think that we should move toward, some date in the future to make this a requirement as we get better and smarter on how to implement the program and as we learn a little bit more.
So having it as a goal really is what we're looking to say, but possibly a goal or to turn into a requirement at some point.
Yeah. Yes. And I think I saw 2025 in there as one of my dates. I think somebody else used 2025. And that, those are flexible depending on how the program is progressing. But yeah, I think a long-term goal, yes.
The only thing I would point out is, if you remember on the presentation from the gentleman from the Homeland Security, he did point out that Axon, who is one of the largest in the state of Maryland and across the country, was compliant with all of their requirements. So are we trying to duplicate and adding more costs to do that? Just seems like that would be the case.
No, because what I would expect out of the state is not that they have to reinvent the wheel. If they were building a data center in partnership with Axon, Axon could still house the data, right? And all of the connection points could still be routed through the state of Maryland for individual agencies. So I think that there is flexibility there in building the technical infrastructure and working with federal partners. A lot of the times you don't know, Department of Homeland Security may say we implemented this program, but really they've contracted with a third-party vendor like an Axon or like other service providers that actually do the back-end implementation. And the state has owns certain components of it, and the private entity owns certain portions of the build. So I don't think that if we went with a vendor like that, I don't think that we're reinventing the wheel, but we are applying the standards for data security and storage.
Okay.
I have a general question. I don't know if Mr. Bishop can answer this. On a state level, I mean, we're a state agency, and I know we follow the state, I would say, Div IT security standards. And I know the university itself, we get audited into every database or everything that we have. Is there, I know on the state level, is that universal? And is there something for each county level that's mimicking the state?
Well, as far as the state goes, there is a statewide cybersecurity program, right? It's run by the state Chief Information Security Officer, Chip Stewart. There's all kinds of standards. There's a whole manual out there about it. It is standard for, I mean, we only have authority to set those standards for state agencies. And obviously we encourage other local government entities to follow suit because they really are good guidelines. And we can even offer many of the services or platforms or even to local and like county governments and such. So what I think the answer to your question is, yeah, it's universal in the sense that state agencies all have to abide, but we don't really have the authority to audit or insist on any other governmental agencies like local or county or any to fit.
Okay. We're going to go up to Senator Reedy's for now. Flagging for the vice chair, I might have to hop out for a second. I hear a crying baby. So where were we? All right, Senator Reedy. His words one.
Thank you for allowing me to jump ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Number one, have a standard package that jurisdictions who need financial help can piggyback onto. Two, there should be a standard best practice or standard for making body camera footage available to the public, were his two. Did you want to elaborate on yours at all, Senator?
I'd just like to point out how thorough my two suggestions are. I commend all of you for the detail that you brought to this. I spoke a minute ago about concerns about mandates versus incentivizing.
Incentives.
But I'm all about, I really am all about making this happen. And I think the two things that I thought were probably, if there is a way for us to simplify the process to get jurisdictions to be able to bid on something that is more, where they can get a better price, I think that would be very important. And I took a lot of interest in the ACLU and some of the discussions we've had about how we make sure the public can see things, but not taint a jury pool and not get out ahead of an investigation. So I think trying to put a sort of a best practice together at the state level would be good. So those are my two suggestions on top of all the great suggestions I see today.
I agree with his suggestions. I like them as well.
Thank you. I'm gonna run upstairs for this baby real quick. Senator Sidnor, can you manage?
Sure. Were there any other comments on Senator Reedy's suggestions? And they seem to be in line with some of the ones that we've already touched on. If not, all right, we'll move on to Chief DeValls. I'll do it a little bit differently, and I'll allow the chief. Would you mind speaking about your recommendations?
Sure, no problem. There were three, and some of them are consistent with what other people have recommended. And number one was require all police agencies to adopt a body-worn camera program for all officers working in a patrol and public-facing capacity in by 2025. And exceptions could be given, obviously, for staff working in non-patrol capacity, admin, undercover officers, narcotic officers. Most of our policies already carve out what these officers are. The second, and I think this is consistent with what other people have talked about, establishes statewide guidelines for body-worn cameras for all agencies. And I was thinking the Maryland Police Training Commission would develop the standards, statewide standards. And the third, and I think this has been touched on somewhat, is funding for departments to start and maintain body-worn camera programs to assist agencies in developing the body-worn cameras programs. I would recommend state funding that would cover the implementation and startup costs of the body-worn camera program. I would also recommend state grant funding on an ongoing basis to assist with maintenance and storage costs. Additional cost savings could be achieved through consortium agreements for state pricing for all agencies in the state. The one thing I don't want to see is for us to mandate that all agencies have body-worn camera programs and not provide assistance, mostly to our smaller agencies that are going to struggle if we try to give them an unfunded mandate. So those are my three. And like I said, I think they touch on several other points that have already been touched on in some shape or fashion previously.
Are there any comments on the chief's recommendations?
I have one quick comment or question, actually. I just want to introduce, since this topic about which officers would be subject to this requirement is coming up here. I just would be curious if people would be open to tweaking that with just one addition that I might ask, and that is that if a department allows its officers to work off duty in uniform, secondary employment, that to me, if that department also has body cams, there's a question there. Because things do happen. I'm thinking about that Ethan Saylor case in Frederick, the disabled kid at the movie theater with the off-duty uniformed sheriffs, and a death happened. So I would throw that out there as a question if y'all would be open to putting at least some mention of this as a policy category.
Delegate Moon, our policy already requires that if they're working in an off-duty capacity in the city and they're in uniform, that they're subject to the same policies and procedures. So they would be required to have their body-worn camera on, same as they would if they were working in an on-duty capacity.
Delegate Moon, ours would be the exact same thing. We require that as part of their off-duty usage.
Hagerstown as well.
I mean, that being the case, would folks mind terribly if we just said that as a course of best practice, that if departments allow their officers to take secondary employment in uniform, that there ought to be consistency in the body cam policies?
I have no issue with that.
So would that be like an amendment you're thinking, Delegate Moon, to this, or I'm just thinking how we capture that.
I can reword my mind to make a note that says something that adds in verbiage about. Let me see. I don't know if anyone has the ability to edit that, but it would say something requiring off-duty in uniform overtime or part-time, and I'm not sure what language we would use, but if anyone has an opportunity to edit, I think it's just an added sentence regarding that.
Okay.
Someone has the ability to edit. We could just add something to what's there.
Thank you. I had a question because I've had, and this is about number 3, trying to figure out, and I'm just curious if anyone within this group has any recommendations as to if the state were to create a grant program with the funding source, what a good funding source might be. What do you tie it into? Because I know, I think for the most part, you have, when you're talking the red light cameras or something, that money generally would go to traffic safety. What do you think would be a good place to look if we were to develop this type of a grant?
Senator Sednor, I think that would be a question for GOCCP perhaps,
Okay.
because there may be some federal possibilities there.
Thank you. All right. So everyone is good with these recommendations? All right. Let's see, Secretary from Do It is.
I can talk about those.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. So Secretary Leahy, because we spoke about these, is really for all of Department of Information Technology. He recommends creating statewide policies and implementation guidelines around usage, data storage, chain of custody, data tagging, and applicability of evidentiary standards. I think that is a repetition of a few others points. A couple of ideas that are kind of central to our agency that really apply here are the standardization of back-end systems. So the sort of hardware infrastructure for those solutions that agencies want to engage, that they maintain their own hardware. There should be standardization around what that looks like and those standards can be drafted at the state level and then as guidelines and then implemented throughout. And then consideration of statewide systems, and this really speaks to a lot of what Mr. Solomon was saying, consideration of statewide systems for data storage, maintenance, and cataloging. So the state of Maryland has statewide IT systems, infrastructure systems in place today that can be utilized by state and local agencies all around Maryland. There's no reason we couldn't make use of some of the existing ones. They would certainly require some engineering and expansion to suit these needs, especially as the program's really ramped up. But things like Network Maryland for transmission and the data centers we have in place for storage, and then talking about the ways we can engineer access and the maintenance and the special circumstances around this kind of data storage and control. Those are all things that the state has some leg up in already. And as we move forward in deciding solutions and contracts, just to keep that in mind for some of the solutions. There's no need in our book to mandate specific solutions that utilize these state resources, but especially as this model matures around the state, certain solutions will certainly come to the fore, and you'll want to have an infrastructure to lean on to consolidate costs. And we have some things already ramped up that could start that.
Thank you. Any questions, any concerns for Mr. Bishop?
I'm assuming that's something that you could negotiate with as part of the contract negotiations with the vendors as to what parts the state would do, what parts they do, and et cetera.
Right, and it doesn't have to be, because different solutions can have different implementations, right? So even the same vendor might have multiple implementation options of a self-hosted storage and network, while they manage the software that connects everything, right? So depending on the solution, if we can commoditize the storage and sort of the hardware infrastructure at a state level, that becomes a big cost savings. That's something we've realized in other major efforts we've done.
I hope that's an opportunity to do, because in the past when I've been involved in some of those similar types of things where we like to do some things and the vendor would like to do the others, it's kind of like, taking a Big Mac into a Wendy's to eat. They kind of want to keep everything to themselves, and then that way they don't have to worry about certain warranties on what they're responsible for and whatnot. I agree. I think that would be a good opportunity. I just don't know if it could have the opposite effect of driving the costs up more.
Right. So are the systems in the state interoperable? Depends on which system. So yeah, generally the infrastructure is built on a very sort of agnostic, solution agnostic basis, so that it's a common infrastructure to support many, many different solutions. And it's very customizable and extensible. You can really carve out pieces to do what you need it to do. But all of it rests on sort of this foundation of servers and storage, and these things all support the same kinds of applications, and we can tie into what exists, expand on it, and serve the need as it becomes apparent. So what's likely to happen, and this is just from experience, and what's happening today is you have these agencies that are already tying into these cloud-based software as a service solutions, and that's a great start. But as they start to mature, those storage expenses really start to add up, and a transition period is probably where you start offloading the oldest recordings into a less expensive state-managed storage solution. And then a long-term solution is where all of these maturing systems start to just natively live on these statewide infrastructure systems. It's not, it's not a build to a single point and say we're done. It's really a maturing process that I think we're going to naturally flow into anyway. And we can start that off. If we start that off with the idea of that in the front, then it'll make it easier to get there in the end.
So I would just want to jump in here and say, I do feel strongly that we do something. I mean, we don't have to put binding language in here or anything, but I do feel strongly that we do something around this whole concept. And at least maybe the way it's phrased is we prohibit contracting with systems that shut the door to, this in the future. Maybe that would be a fair way that folks could say, okay, we'll at least agree to that, short of actually saying we're going to do this, because it seems, again, that the fewer vendors we end up with in circulation, the more this sort of thing becomes possible. And again, I'd point to the same efficiencies with who's doing the redaction and all of that. So if we could do something here, I would appreciate if we could massage the language to people's comfort. And especially just like basic stuff like making sure the tagging and languages are consistent, so that if we do end up in a world with 3 strong vendors in play, they're at least all guaranteed to be using the same language.
Can I ask a question? Can we, I mean, I generally agree with the sentiment, but can we require that kind of thing? I mean, this isn't legislation yet, but can we require, say you can't bid unless, can we in legislation say you can't bid unless you have these? I'm just curious.
What would even be the process for this? Maybe that's a good place to start.
I mean, maybe, Bishop, maybe, like I'm familiar that historically the state had this CATS plus track schedule with a bunch of people contracted on.
Right. So essentially you have, traditionally how this works is you create some kind of statewide master contract, vendor that have certain specifications built into it. And you would have these standards, whatever standards are associated with whatever we're trying to do, you build those in, some certain requirements, some certain specifications. One of those could certainly be that whatever solutions are presented need to be compatible with, some kind of statewide infrastructure baseline, right? So we could write that into the contract language, the master contract language, and then vendors present, and they present their solutions, and as I'm not a contractor, so I don't know the language, but essentially they present their solutions as fulfilling the contract. It's evaluated, and then they're added as contractors on this master contract, and then entities can make procurements against this statewide contract for the solution that meets their needs. And then they already know that it's been vetted, that it meets the requirements, that it's met the pricing standards, and it's already been covered that way.
So as a follow-up, Delegate Lewis, if it's okay if I ask a follow-up to him, I was thinking about this from a legislative standpoint. Like, you don't want to put a piece of legislation in that tries to spell this out, but we could have this be recommendation that is something that doesn't. It would be sort of common sense for a procurement for this to be a guiding principle in a procurement. Is there a way we could have that as a recommendation without having it going in the legislation,
might need to
correct?
Get up with DLS too. I mean, I imagine there's some place where we could, like all of our appropriations requests, that allow for us to spend money turn into contracts eventually, right?
Right.
So maybe that's a DLS question for us legislators after this, to figure out how do we appropriately do so.
That's fine. I was just trying to think, if we're putting in a recommendation, does every recommendation we have to be something we need to do a bill about? And I think the answer to that is no. I mean,
no, correct.
So we could just check on that. We can inquire about it. I don't know. It's just, I definitely think we want to have some uniformity. We definitely want to indicate that that's our desire so that we can make it as seamless as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, not all the recommendations need to be legislated. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on behalf of the recommendations from Secretary Leahy? If not, Sheriff, you are up now. You mind, I'll read them and allow you to explain it. 1, require all police agencies to adopt the body-worn camera program for all officers working the street by 2025. That seems like a consistent thing. Exception for administrative personnel, narcotics officers, or others working in undercover capacity, which makes sense. All agencies should minimally be required to follow the statewide guidelines for body cameras established by the Maryland Police Standards and Training Commission. That's another thoroughfare that we've seen. The state should establish a one-time grant program for agencies to establish a program for body-worn cameras. And I guess this one-time grant, is that just for the hardware?
That's for the initial purchase of the equipment. However, Chief Duvall's actually said maybe an ongoing grant to take care of ongoing maintenance and storage issues. So I would agree with his that, you know, it probably should be an ongoing grant, but at least initially to get started, these agencies, particularly smaller agencies, are going to need grants to be able to purchase and contract with body-worn camera vendors.
Okay. Any questions, concerns about the sheriff's recommendations? I think the first two we've heard a couple times now.
And with regards to, I'm assuming, Sheriff, that you're okay with the modification that the chief was talking about earlier as well, with the secondary employment?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
Thank you.
I think I missed that part for the baby. I'll get filled in later. So we're gonna move on to Chief Lisa Myers. I don't know, is she on or representative on? Well, if not, I will, I'll read 1. Resolve the looming concern about intrusive PIA access to body camera footage. State law fails to recognize the vast difference between video footage and conventional paper documents. The state must find a reasonable balance here to serve the important interests of public access, victim privacy, and reasonable privacy custodial responsibilities. Without doing so, a worrisome cloud hangs over every well-intentioned policy being contemplated. Number 2, leverage cost savings for storage, maintenance of footage. Currently, each department is on its own to secure, store, manage, review, and as warranted, redact body camera footage. Under an expected mandate for each department to use this equipment, this will result in a massive, inconsistent patchwork of procedures and overhead costs. A state-led resource to consolidate this function for local departments opting in could ensure professionalism, access, and reasonable costs. Number 3, provide incentives for local departments to engage in best practices. Statewide policies creating expectations for departments and officers can set the stage for widespread use. Ideal state law will promote these best practices locally. With the full range of police-related policies under debate, counties hope that the resulting structure of state incentives recognizes and rewards those governments that do pursue wise, preferable, sensible local laws and practices. And I think that kind of gets at what Senator Reedy was talking about for incentives for people who are, I guess, following, you know, the guidelines, maybe the Standards and Training Commission puts in, or, you know, putting some strings attached to, I guess, which the sheriff was just talking about with, you know, the grants and other things. You know, I know it might be difficult, but, you know, I'm just going to state it because it's been stated several times here about this cost for redacting body-worn cameras. We might not find right now in our group how to get economies of scale with that, because I know there's a lot of intricacies there, but it just seems like a large cost. Were there any questions? I don't know, does the chief have a representative on?
Well, I was going to jump in anyway in defense of the Howard County recommendation, since they're part of this discussion, and Senator Sidnor has been there for these discussions on. We've had a heck of a time trying to deal with how to do fair public release and shield victim privacy and not have horrible officer injuries and deaths going out. And so that's where, so when I read the Howard County recommendations, I sort of came back to this concept. I will point out one thing that makes me consider trying to take a second bite at this apple, is that there's a phrase in her recommendations where she says departments that opt in to sharing the redaction officers. And I wonder if it would be possible to take that lead and try and get a recommendation that for those departments that want to pool redaction and PIA officers together, perhaps we study and facilitate this possibility. Does that maybe thread the needle here?
I'm concerned about agencies that have different systems that may be excluded, because the vast majority of people are going to have the Axon platform, but there are going to be other agencies that don't. So if the redaction may be different, or the process, and so much familiar with Axon, but they're not familiar with Panasonic,
It would be to the detriment. That's true. But I guess if two departments are using Axon, shouldn't they be allowed to team up and share on some of the costs?
I think so, but if that's a I don't want to say a reward, but if we're giving someone something extra that if you have the Panasonic platform, there's just no one else in the state that has that. Is that fair across the board? Is all I'm saying. I understand what you're trying to get at, but I don't want to put departments that have not the mainstream platform at a disadvantage. So I don't know if there's a way to carve that out or not, but
maybe there's a timing component of this, Chief, where after the state has established these contract schedules, and ideally everyone are more moving over to systems that talk to each other, right? To Bishop's point, that then this could be a possibility. I don't know.
Well, one of the things police agencies are good at is creating MOUs with other entities. I know the City of Hagerstown Police Department and Sheriff's Office has so many different things that we coordinate and share that I think that's really where that belongs. In our county, we have 3 smaller municipalities, for example. They're 4-man departments. And in those cases, if they were on the same platform, certainly we would reach out to them and offer that as an opportunity. But I don't know that we could do that as a statewide program.
Is it possible? I guess so departments right now, I gather, just sort of like McCarthy and the Howard State's Attorney, just shaking hands to review cases for each other. I guess this is all possible. I guess I still have a question whether it's not sort of an encouraged practice in some way. But I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that we don't have to have a piece of legislation requiring it, but if somehow we were to end up after this study with more departments than previously finding ways to team up on this, I would think that would be a good thing.
I caution, because you still have to bring into account attorneys that review this as well. Obviously, the city of Tacoma Park, we have our own city attorney. There would be a different review process for that than there would be even if we piggybacked off the county police on their Axon platform. So I agree with the sheriff. There are a lot of moving parts with this. Like I said, we have a lot of MOUs with the county police here in the county, but that's maybe much different than in Washington County or other counties. So I understand completely what we're trying to do. I think we just need to think through all of the different moving parts as we do this. And redaction is just not redacting the video. It's having it reviewed by the legal entities of each jurisdiction and so on and so forth. So it becomes more involved. I mean, maybe just the manual redaction process, and then each jurisdiction could go through the additional process of having their attorneys review that. But it's more involved than just the simple redaction.
Okay. We're going to keep it moving. So that's Mr. Nice Warner, Hagerstown City Administrator. You're gonna forgive me. I've already forgotten what these acronyms are. Require all LEAs to have a body-worn camera program by 2025, except for those whose ability to do their job will be compromised, which I'm assuming is undercover, back office, and the like. And that's, law enforcement officer, field folks. 2, financial assistance provided by the state to allow for municipalities to initially purchase cameras and initiate their overall camera process, including storage requirements. And number 3, establishing process for cloud-based storage of body-worn camera accessible video for a minimum of 12 to 18 months, allow for the compression and archiving of video after the point to be retrieved upon request. Do you elaborate at all?
Yeah, I mean, those are, I tried to look at it from the perspective, we already have body-worn cameras here, and going through the process that we went through, and I think probably pretty similar to Sheriff Mullendore. It's we all know it's expensive, and there are going to be those smaller municipalities. I think about here in Washington County, the Boonesboroughs and the Smithsburgs, that even though they only have a few officers, without some sort of coordinated financial situation like we've kind of talked about here, it's going to be a burden on them, especially coming hopefully out of the back end of this crisis and trying to recover revenue. So that's just where I was more coming from, was from a administrative financial side.
Got it. Any other questions for Nice Warner? If not, we're going to hop past Solomons, because we just did that. Major Phil too. He has some points and subpoints. Number 1, funding. Of course, the greatest barrier to implementing body-worn cameras for all law enforcement agencies within Maryland will be startup costs, as well as the maintenance costs to keep a program running. Costs include the individual body-worn camera unit, data transfer, data storage, data retrieval, and associated video, audio enhancement, redaction costs. Costs will be ongoing in terms of maintenance, upgrades, and associated staffing needs. I would recommend a state grant funding that would last over several years in aiding law enforcement agencies, absorb some of the initial startup costs, as well as some of the continued maintenance costs. The long-term goal will be agency self-budgeting for continued costs over time. I do not know if speed camera or red light camera revenue can be directed towards this in terms of state allocation for speed camera or red light is in agencies, as well as required local allocation for jurisdictions that have essentially cameras revenues. I like the way you're thinking though. I would also look at the possibility of a nominal state fee associated with court-related costs. 2, state contracting or consortium agreements. For cost savings and efficiency, I would like to see if piggybacking or consortium agreements can be looked into for state pricing with the major vendors that are used in the state. At this point, I will look at pricing for both cloud-based as well as locally held storage. This may delve into IT-based involvement in terms of recommended security parameters for cloud and with data held in local service, i.e. FedRAMP. 3, agency usage policy. On the recommendation of the State's Attorneys Association, I believe that any local law enforcement agency policies regarding body-worn camera usage remains under the auspices of the Maryland Police Training Commission. Currently, individual agency policies are publicly available for inspection, to include website postings. I believe that there are aspects of the regulation that can be retrieved for possible enhancement. 1, I would recommend that all police citizen encounters be recorded. This being said, the objective of body-worn camera recordings is to capture any and all information that is available should it be needed. There needs to be a balance in retention times as to non-critical recordings of basic traffic stops. Use of force incidents, arrests, and other incidents deemed of significance. Retention periods can be based on specific criminal or civil statutes of limitations or court appeal limitations. This could be codified in either published retention schedules or into law. The right to privacy still exists and should be observed on the use and release of data, particularly to the public. For court, body-worn camera recordings are normally provided as in the course of discovery. I would assume the recordings are the entire incident unadulterated. B, should there be restrictions or limitations on the divulging of recordings beyond that, codified in law under the court and judicial proceedings article. And C, should recordings, audio and video be fully redacted before any release beyond court purposes and code? Oh, that's more of a question. Okay. Major, did you want to elaborate on anything there?
No, I think we're all talking about the same thing. I was trying to hit on points of, I guess, existing areas where we could put stuff without reinventing the wheel. And I kind of came to mind some of the things about the use of body cameras for off-duty. There's a law written for under the public safety article. We could always add that as agencies shall have a policy on that. So, and some of the funding, I don't know. One of the things about the red light and speed camera funding, to my knowledge, state agencies are not allowed to have that. So I know for the University of Maryland, we're not allowed to have, by law, speed cameras or red light cameras. Now, the city of College Park has them, and they generate revenue based on being in the university's area. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and I was always told every year, the city of College Park, there's a cap as to how much money they can keep, and they always go over. Can some of that overage, wherever it's going, be redirected towards body cameras? So, but I just don't know how much, you know, I'm sure there's a report somewhere out there as to this every year. So, but for consortium agreements, for a university, not only are we benefit from statewide contracting, we also have agreements with other universities, even out of state. So that's just by MOU, we can go to the University of Texas and piggyback off their contracts. So.
That's good to know. You know, I for one would like if we, if you all saw that Governor Northam in Virginia, they're going to be looking at recreational over there, and New Jersey and other states moved. Maybe if, you know, we move towards a similar posture here in the state, we can dedicate a portion of those revenues to something like this, which I think would be helpful for police community relations, but I don't know. But it's a good idea to talk about potential funding revenues. Any other questions, concerns for Major Phil too? All right. Seeing none, now we're going to move over to our contributors' concerns. Of course, you remember that State's Attorney Gibson presented. And all right. So I want to begin by stating that I had the pleasure of chairing the Maryland State's Attorney Association's Committee on Police and Prosecutorial Reforms. At the conclusion of our final meeting, all 24 elected state's attorneys were in favor of body-worn camera technology being implemented and mandated statewide, with the following caveat, which is also my primary recommendation, that appropriate additional funding is provided to the state's attorney's office here in SAOs to allow us to meet our legal obligations for processing all the additional data, information that accompanies body-worn cameras. The focus is typically on police, and essentially they stated that they have costs as well, technology costs, licensing costs, and the like. The second recommendation is that we utilize a system that emphasizes the easy redaction, transfer, and sharing of data similar to what Axon offers with evidence.com. This process can be quite complex, and technologically compatibility issues can arise with different programs. Therefore, having one comprehensive system for all body-worn camera issues like playback, review, redaction, transfer, storage would be a tremendous asset. And I think this kind of goes to what we were talking about before, whether we have multiple vendors or not, you know, like, you know, we've kind of been having one conversation for those, but, you know, you could have multiple contracts for hardware, and then on the software cloud thing, end up having one, though it seems like people may not want to go that route. But from what Bishop stated, you know, the state could definitely help facilitate something like that. But any thoughts on the state's attorney's recommendations on behalf of the Maryland State's Attorney Association? None? Okay. All right. I'm gonna go to this next one. I think we're almost done going through them. I think we might have to end up having people just we're not going to have time to have everyone vote because we're way over. So Jason Dombowski was from Bodyworn by Utility. They're another vendor other than Atson that presented. They suggested that we require policy-based automatic recording with GPS capabilities, which was apparently endorsed by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And officers should not be required to do something that technology can do for them. Policy-based automatic recording removes the decision and burdens of turning cameras on and off from police officers. They just turn on automatically according to law enforcement agencies' recording policy. We recommend the task force ensure the technology adopted by law enforcement agencies in the state require policy-based recording capabilities, meaning the cameras automatically turn on in certain situations at the direction of the agency's own policies, such as weapon removal from holster, turning on the light bar, any dispatch call for service, an officer goes down during foot pursuits, or other predefined automatic triggers. I guess they sent us an article. GPS features on body-worn cameras allow for additional automation, management, and customization, thus taking further burden off the officer. The back-end technology allows for action zones and geofencing. When the officer enters the geofenced area, the body-worn camera automatically begins recording, which is especially important in active shooter situations in response to civil disturbance. 2, require uniform integrated cameras. Recently, there has been several instances where body-worn cameras have failed to capture reported footage of an interaction as a result of the camera falling off, most notably the Rashard Brooks death in Atlanta. We recommend the task force focus on technology where the body camera is integrated into the officer's uniform and therefore can never be dislodged or knocked off during a struggle or foot pursuit. Any body-worn camera that is attached to the outside of an officer's uniform is subject to frequently getting knocked off during a use of force incident, resulting in failure to record and document the incident in its entirety. And 3, require cloud-based data storage, which we've talked about a good bit. Task force heard over and over again that departments, public defenders, and stakeholders were worried about data storage and related staffing needs, as well as the security of evidentiary data footage. We recommend the task force prioritize technology where the data footage is auto offloaded to secure cloud instantaneously from the field with no docking stations needed. Instant video offload from the field protects the integrity of the footage, takes the burden off the officer to dock the camera, and makes the footage easier to access by attorneys, both defense and prosecution, with much fewer staff and resources needed to manage the program within departments. And I guess they sent an article about that as well. Any thoughts about their recommendations?
Unfortunately, most of what he's requiring is going to be extremely costly.
Yeah.
First of all, turning cameras on and off automatically requires additional equipment and so forth to do that, much of which has not been refined to the point where it would be applicable to every police agency. Likewise, the downloading of data from the field is also not practical. In rural areas such as ours, the bandwidth would not be there to support that. It would be so slow. It just wouldn't be practical.
We're working on broadband.
Yeah, there you go. And likewise, incorporating the camera into the uniform, that also would add a tremendous expense to the agencies to do that. While that is a good thing, and some of these things obviously in the future may happen, I don't think they're practical at this point.
I'd just like to say that I also think we have to be a little bit careful about having things be so specific as to specific vendors may have just the solution we need for those recommendations. You have to be a little bit careful that we don't make the recommendations sort of very specific to something only a couple of vendors can do. I'm not casting any aspersions on the recommendation, but I think some of the stuff sounds great. But yeah, some of even the geofence type things, I'm pretty familiar with that technology. I think you could have a problem in rural areas with even having the whole idea of someone in a geofenced area gets their camera turned on automatically. That there could be some real problems with that. Down the road, a lot of this may be more possible, but I think we'd want to be careful not to get that specific in our recommendations.
Yeah, I will say from a, as I read it, it all sounded very expensive to me. I imagine from the public standpoint too, the idea of knowing that, you know, the possibility of geofencing something where more officers come to a scene, their cameras automatically turn on would give some assurance, particularly in this national climate. So there's something there. I don't know, you know, we're not looking at numbers on how much that would cost us, right? And or whether that'd be in the recommendation, but maybe down the line that is something that we all should be looking at. One, to see that if it does ease the burden of officers, but also just, you know, we always have to keep in mind the public's trust, and are we doing things that, you know, makes them think better of their government, right?
And if I could say, I know within 1A, that first sentence, an officer should not be required to do something that technology can do for them. I think everybody's kind of touched on the expensiveness of it, but as broad as it is, I mean, I certainly think that it would, I think if we're talking body cameras, that's one thing, but if we're talking all sorts of other things that technology could be used for, it's a little.
Name what you're thinking about.
So I just want to make certain that I put that on the record. That's all.
No problem. All right, we're going to move on to another vendor who presented, Richard Reinhardt, Motorola Solutions. One, should the state consider plans to have an overarching evidence management sharing platform? It should be able to integrate with multiple vendors in order to preserve local choice and future flexibility. Regardless of where the data is stored, whether it is with DoIT in the cloud or a hybrid, the interface to partner agencies to share information should be proven to be able to work with multiple vendors and platforms. Two, in addition, it would be beneficial for any statewide DIMS to be flexible enough to adapt to all different shapes and sizes of the agencies within the state. An example would be on-premise or fully hosted cloud or anywhere in between. It would have the flexibility to offload video evidence in various ways, for example, LTE, Wi-Fi, direct to cloud, etc. Lastly, having a one-stop solution where a true in-car motorcycle interview rooms exist to fit the agency needs. I don't really understand that last one, but we're seeing some similar themes here, though. Yeah, any questions or concerns about Motorola Solutions recommendations?
And I'm just not certain that I know, and maybe Mr. Bishop knows what a statewide D. What is a D? What is that? Yeah, DIMS. What is that?
I don't know in this context.
Okay.
Nothing.
Yeah, that's the problem when you use acronyms.
Very good. Thank you.
You know, I was like, as long as it wasn't just me. I'm sure they're going to email us afterwards. I'll look for your email, Richard. All right. And all right, so that's what we have, unless others have some more to send us. So here's what we're going to do. It's 2:31. We're at time. What I would like folks to do is if you could take the document that you were sent and just generally go through each of the recommendations and mark which ones you're in favor of, and then send that to Katie and Al. And what Senator Sitnor and I will do is that we'll talk with them to see how we can compile the refined recommendations, because some of the recommendations are repeated, right? So they can be more universal of everyone's ideas. And I think that should work for us, and we'll schedule another time for us to go over what should be our official recommendations based off of everyone's feedback here. And of course, just because we have these recommendations doesn't mean that everything's turning into legislation. You know, some things can just be like, policy we do moving forward. I think as Bishop was talking, like some of the stuff the state may just be able to do, and we can talk offline about that. But I do want to thank everyone for their participation.
Delegate Lou, can I just ask one thing about their critique of it? Is it any way possible for Katie or someone else to put, because we got multiple iterations of the same recommendations, to bundle all those together? Because for us to have to go through each one of these individual recommendations is going to be difficult, because there's multiple moving parts with each recommendation. It would be much easier if there was someone that could kind of lump each, like the 2025 recommendation. You see that in multiple.
It's clear. Yeah.
I don't know how, if there's a way to make that easier, because going through all of these recommendations and trying to pick out what we don't like, but what we like is going to be difficult.
That's fair. Al and Katie, do you all think y'all have the capacity to try to glean through all these recommendations and the ones that are like repeated, kind of combine them so there's, it's not like we're voting on iterations of the same thing?
Yes, Katie and I can work on that, and then Katie will push that back out again.
Okay. Does that work, Chief?
Okay.
Yeah, yes, it does. That's very helpful. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Well, like I was saying, I thank everyone for their time and participation. I do very much hope that the end result of this will be what we started with, a host of policies and practices that helps us drive down costs so we can scale up deployment of body-worn cameras, but they also won't be burdensome to the jurisdictions that use them. In addition to that, we can just improve and upgrade policy. We know that first time we reviewed all of this was in 2015, so it was about time we did a review anyway. That might require us empowering the Police Standards and Training Commission more, or not. We'll see based off of the end results. But I want to thank everyone for their time today, and have a good one.
Happy holidays to you all.
Have a great holiday.
Thank you all. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Enjoy that new sun there, Delegate Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
Have
a safe
have a good
holiday with your family at home.
There you go. I was expecting to, I think he left. No, he's still there. I was expecting to see a little baby formula on your clothes when you came back.
Oh yeah, no. Honestly, I'm supposed to be on leave, but all these work groups, so I'm spending more time. So I need to go relieve my wife for a couple of hours. She's been a soldier. So y'all have a blessed one.
All right. Thank y'all.
Have a great holiday.